On today's episode of the Locked On Knicks podcast, I'm going to tell you why Malcolm Brogdon is perhaps the final piece to the Knicks championship roster.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to the New York Knicks. My name is Gavin Schall. I am a native New Yorker, credentialed media member that's been covering the New York Knicks for nearly a decade, and your Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. If you didn't know, this is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks. Give you those detailed insight on your favorite team 5 whole days a week. So be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team. On today's show, for people who don't know or have not been watching the last few years, this has been a personal pet project of mine, right? I have probably done about 10 episodes over the last 3 years, talking about Malcolm Brogdon trades, talking about what Malcolm Brogdon could potentially bring to the Knicks, talking about how good of a fit I thought he would be next to Jalen Brunson. And for various reasons, it just wasn't the right time. The Knicks didn't have the assets to get it done. He maybe wanted a different role than what the Knicks could offer. And it felt like it was going to be a case, at least in my deluded mind, of two star-crossed lovers who never came together. Well, on Friday, that changed as the Knicks signed Malcolm Brogdon to a 1-year non-guaranteed veteran minimum contract. For now, Malcolm Brogdon does not have a guaranteed spot on the roster, and yet it does sort of feel like he's going to end up on the roster. So on today's show, we're going to talk about what he would potentially bring to the Knicks if a trade is inevitable to open up the room necessary to keep both him and Landry Shamet, or potentially Garrison Matthews, right? You're only going to be able to, unless you have multiple trades of the young talent on the Knicks roster, you're only going to be able to keep 2 of those guys. But we'll talk about scenarios where they could potentially keep 3 as well. And then I thought I would quickly give you guys an updated rotation. I want to basically touch on a bunch of different topics that we will dive into even more in depth over the course of this week. But I wanted to start off with my big picture thoughts on what Malcolm Brogdon brings to the team. First of all, I think this is an acknowledgement, right? Because the premise, like to skip ahead a little bit, is that the Knicks are probably going to trade one of Pacom Dadier or Tyler Kolek, unless there is a bigger trade of someone like Deuce McBride or maybe even Mitchell Robinson looming that none of us anticipate. But for now, we think the Knicks are possibly going to trade a little bit of their future for their present. And I think the reason you do that is because you believe you're in the middle of a championship window. And this is something Alex and I talked about a whole lot last season, right? You don't know how things are going to go, but on paper, this looks like your best chance, right? Tyrese Halliburton out for the year. The Indiana Pacers that were, frankly, even if they didn't profile as one from a pure talent perspective, the way they play as a team, the way Halliburton runs that offense, they are a juggernaut. The Boston Celtics, as much as we want to clown them, and as much as the Knicks have every right to clown them after beating them in the playoffs in 6 games, some of those games in embarrassing fashion, the Boston Celtics were a juggernaut. Jason Tatum's out for the year, right? The Celtics are not a factor in the championship conversation. The Pacers are not a factor in the championship conversation. In turn, the Knicks competition is a Cleveland team that has never gotten out of the second round, that seems to always get in their own way. And maybe last year was just injuries, and maybe they really are a step above the Knicks. Again, I think the Knicks are going to be better this year. I think they're going to be closer to what Cleveland's level was during the regular season. But you have a Cleveland team that just hasn't done it, hasn't proven anything yet, and that the Knicks, at least in a playoff context with Mitchell Robinson in the roster, theoretically match up somewhat well with. You have an Orlando team that's never gotten out of the first round, that hasn't won a playoff series together, that is really talented, but is led by a 23-year-old and a 22-year-old, extremely talented young players that I think are very capable of beating the Knicks in a series. They haven't proven anything. You have a Pistons team that you've already beaten. You have a Hawks team that I think at the end of the day, we'll talk about it with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks sometime this week or next. I don't think has the top end talent to beat the Knicks or to win a championship. I think they're going to be quite good. You have the Bucks, and it's basically just Giannis and the Giannisets, right? They do not have a complete roster. They do not have a championship level roster. The West is loaded. No one is arguing that the door is wide open, because I would say the Oklahoma City Thunder are the best team since the Kevin Durant Golden State Warriors, right? And that is a major, major impediment in terms of the Knicks winning a championship. But you get to the finals, you have a chance. We saw it with the Knicks against the Celtics, right? I thought the Celtics last year were the best team since the Kevin Durant Warriors. And you know what? Like, the Knicks were close enough that with some variance in shooting, and ultimately with the Jason Tatum injury, though the Knicks were on track to be up 3-1 in that series even before Jason Tatum got hurt, the Knicks were going to beat the Boston Celtics, and the Knicks did beat the Boston Celtics, and it shows you just how thin the margins are. And if you get into the arena, the Knicks have a realistic shot at a championship. And I think that is the primary impetus behind this move, to bring in Malcolm Brogdon and say, hey, we don't want to trade Tyler Kolek. We don't want to trade Pacom Dadier. Malcolm Brogdon might end up playing an extremely small role on this team. He might not be in the everyday rotation when it's all said and done, but if this is a guy that flips one playoff game for us, even in the way campaign flipped game one against the Detroit Pistons, that could be the difference between winning and losing a series. That could be the difference between winning and losing a championship. So the next step in that conversation is Malcolm Brogdon still that same player? Is he still capable of all that? I think for a number of reasons he is. This is another step forward in the Knicks continuing to lean into shooting and into offense, at least in terms of their roster construction, right? That is something that Tom Thibodeau did not really want to do in terms of the lineups he put out, at least consistently, right? There were certainly bench units where he's built them around Cat, and he built them around offense, and he built them around shooting. But Tom Thibodeau consistently last year was trying to play as big and as defensively oriented as he possibly could, while still maintaining some level of balance, right? Which was his reticence, I think, to start Mitchell Robinson initially. But we spent this whole offseason talking about, right? You trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, you build your team around Jalen Brunson and Cat, two, in my money, of the top 10 or 12 best offensive players in the NBA, and both guys who are going to be liabilities defensively. You are committing to a philosophy where your pathway to a title is being an all-time great offense and a defense that can hold their own. And every move the Knicks have made this offseason has been doubling down on that, right? Jordan Clarkson, more shooting, more playmaking. Gershon Yabusele, a transition threat, an above-the-break threat, a pump-and-go threat. Now in Landry Shamet, right? You bring in, instead of bringing in Ben Simmons and maybe that was Ben Simmons' decision. Maybe that wasn't the Knicks' decision, but either way, instead of bringing Ben Simmons as just an all-defense guy, you bring in Shamet as another high-level shooter. You potentially bring Garrison Matthews as another elite shooter. You bring in Malcolm Brogdon, who brings more than just that to the table, right? Throughout his career, he is profiled as an elite shooter from distance, though not on high volume. Career 39% from three. But what he also brings to the table is just one of the best driving guards, one of the best finishing guards in recent NBA history, right? We are talking, or okay, maybe that is overstating it, but in terms of someone who was not a star player, I'll say amongst role players, right? One of the best driving and finishing guards over the last 10 years in the NBA. And you look at his numbers from last year, right? 13, 4, and 4, mostly for the Washington Wizards, on 43% from the field, 29% from three, 88% from the foul line, right? It was far and away the least efficient year of his career. In fact, it was the first year of his career by points per shot attempt, which is what Clean the Glass uses, my preferred metric for overall shooting efficiency, right? He was 46th percentile in that statistic. He was 88th percentile just 3 years ago. If I'm remembering correctly, I don't have it up in front of me right now. He had never been lower than 58th percentile in his career. Yep, I just confirmed that. 58th percentile in his career in points per shot attempt. So last year, he was really inefficient. You look at that and you say, all right, has this guy taken a significant step back as a player? Or at least in terms of his athleticism, right? And at 32, he's going to turn 33 relatively early in the season. That's totally possible. And yet, you look at his stats at the rim, and I'm going to say that like that same talent is still in there. 38% of his shots came at the rim last year. That was 93rd percentile. That is a ridiculous percentage of his shots at the rim. And keep in mind the context of that, right? That was playing with Bilal Coulibaly, Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr, guys who were not exactly floor spacers, right? Washington was one of the worst space teams in the NBA. And yet, despite that, Malcolm Brogdon was able to consistently get to the rim and create shots at the rim. And you could say, all right, that's great, but he probably didn't shoot very well when he got there, right? Because he was going up against it just multiple trees, bigs just clogging up the lane. It probably didn't look all that good. You'd be wrong. He shot 65% at the rim, which was a career high in his age 32 season. That's incredibly exciting. That tells me, again, unless there was a significant drop off this past summer, and I would assume the Knicks have intel that that wasn't the case, that is a really good number. That was above average in terms of shot efficiency in the NBA, despite the fact that he had crazy volume. He was 62 percentile in finishing, despite above 90th percentile volume, right? That is a great combination. And on top of that, he was 94th percentile on shooting fouls drawn rate. So basically, like, that is the percentage of your shots that end in a shooting foul. And he was really good at that. I think the number was 14%. That is really, really encouraging to the idea that he is still there athletically. And the 3-point shooting was down. I would assume the degree of difficulty on his threes were way up. First of all, he shot them at a career low volume, right? He just 21% of his shots were from three. That was 5th percentile amongst guards in the NBA. He's never in his career. He's always been an efficient 3-point shooter. He's never been a high volume 3-point shooter, right? Not someone super comfortable generating them on his own, like Jordan Clarkson can at times. Like, has generally been more reliant on playing with guards that could create catch and shoot threes for him. And on the Knicks, he will have that, right? Jalen Brunson, if they get to play together, will create catch and shoot threes for him. Jordan Clarkson, if those two play together as a bench unit, will be able to create catch and shoot threes for him. But when he does play with high quality teammates and he gets good looks, he is, as indicated by that ridiculous 39% career number, he's been an excellent 3-point shooter. And last season, just to give you some context on why that shooting percentage was so low, right? 29% from three last season. He got only 1.5 catch and shoot threes per game last year. The year before that, he was taking 3 per game. So he was not really taking the types of threes he was comfortable with, shot them at low volume, shot them at low efficiency. I would expect if he does ultimately make the Knicks roster, it all looks a lot better this year. The other element that Malcolm Brogdon brings to the table that I think the Knicks really need still is playmaking. And playmaking that I think you can more viably play next to Jalen Brunson than Jordan Clarkson. And I want to go back and I want to watch some film of his time on the Wizards. Hopefully I get to talk to our friends over at Locked On Wizards, because I'm interested just how poor he is defensively at this point in his career. These some of the advanced numbers, and we can get into them throughout the week, were not very good for him on the defensive end of the floor. And that'll kind of dictate whether or not it's viable for him to play with Jalen Brunson and next to Jalen Brunson. But the playmaking he brings is going to be absolutely essential for the New York Knicks. I want to get into that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks. But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, raise his hand, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally, feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Guys, this is what I love about Monarch Money, because I am someone who consistently procrastinated, like just putting all my financial info in one place, getting organized, and just having a coherent plan going forward. It was just something that gave me a lot of anxiety. And with Monarch Money, having an app that does that for me, that puts it all in one place, that points me in the right direction of like, all right, this is the smart way to handle my money going forward. It's just an incredible asset. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. All right, what's up, guys? We are back here on Locked On Knicks. I want to continue talking through the playmaking part of this, because I think that was probably the single biggest missing element in the Knicks offense last year, right? Because they trade Julius Randle, who, whatever you want to say about him as a passer, and at times he was selfish, at times he was just like a little bit slow to make the right pass and to make the extra pass. He had an ability to drive and draw 2 or 3 defenders and spray it out that no one on this roster had, and no one on this roster has, right? Jalen Brunson gives you an element of that and is just a really creative, I would say, close to A+ level interior passer. But in terms of driving and spraying out to perimeter, Brunson does not really have the size to consistently do that, right? He can make those easy, like in the lane, someone's open in the corner whip out. He's not really making like in the lane, one-handed hook pass, cross court from the opposite block type passes. And Mikal Bridges can do that on occasion. Josh Hart, like if he actually draws a defender, can do that on occasion. Cat will like occasionally surprise you with a good pass against a double team. But I've said it all offseason. What this Knicks roster really lacked was just a creative presence in terms of like generating easy shots for other guys. And when you look at the down seasons OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges had from the corners, I think that was a big part of it. And we already told you when they signed Jordan Clarkson, he brings a lot of that to the table, right? For a guy who is primarily a two guard, he is an elite creator. And the same can be said of Malcolm Brogdon. These last 2 years, he was 95th percentile and 84th percentile, respectively, in terms of assist percentage as a combo guard, while his turnover percentage was above average in terms of it being low, right? He didn't commit a whole lot of turnovers. So those two stats together are really, really encouraging. And this is a guy who's still a high-level finisher, still a high-level passer. It'll be up to how good his defense is in regards to whether he can actually close games with Jalen Brunson or play substantial minutes with Jalen Brunson, because when you already have Brunson and Cat on the floor, it is going to be really difficult at times to have a third defensive liability out there. But if Brogdon can regain some of his own form, which at times was like a perfectly fine defender, right? Like he was solid and he held his own. The Knicks could have really found a piece here and could have found a piece that could potentially close some playoff games for them, which is an extraordinary thing to do with the veterans minimum. Now, what do the Knicks need to do to actually bring in Malcolm Brogdon? So it's possible we have this all wrong and the Knicks only intend to keep one of Brogdon one player between Brogdon, Shamet, and Garrison Matthews. As things currently stand, with how close the Knicks are to the second apron, that is all they have room for. They had room for one veterans minimum contract, and that was only because of the generosity of Gershon Yabusele leaving, I think, something like $200,000 on the table to make that happen for the New York Knicks. But we've gotten a whole lot of reports, namely from Stephen Bondy of the New York Daily News, that the Knicks, that executives around the league are expecting the Knicks to make a move to have space to keep Brogdon and either Shamet or Garrison Matthews. I will probably do an episode talking about Garrison Matthews later this week. I would think it's more likely it's going to be Landry Shamet given the relationship there. But the point is, as of now, the Knicks can only keep one of those guys. So who ultimately gets traded? In my mind, immediately went to Tyler Kolek. If you guys remember and have been listening throughout the last few weeks when we talked about the prospect of the Knicks potentially bringing in one more guy after Landry Shamet, or even before they signed Landry Shamet, Tyler Kolek is the name I was repeatedly throwing out there. It was a name like a bunch of people were throwing out there as the one who would get dealt. And certainly purely from a basketball perspective, it makes the most sense to move on from Tyler Kolek at this point. And yet a lot of the reporting has been centered around Pacom Dadier from Ian Begley. When he put out his article on the Landry Shamet trade, if you're watching on YouTube, that screenshot is up right now. Trading either Pacom Dadier or, this is notable, or Miles McBride could clear enough cap space to sign both Shamet and Brogdon. There are combinations of players the Knicks could trade to create space to add both veterans, but those two are being mentioned because it would be the most direct path for the Knicks to take if they want to keep both vets. And then he updated it because we got an article from the guy who runs Third Apron, Yossi Goslin, excuse me, who does an incredible job with the cap, right up there with our own Jeremy Cohen as my go-to capologist. And he broke it down, and essentially the Knicks would really be up against it if they decide to keep Pacom Dadier over Tyler Kolek. If you move on from Dadier, because of the way his contract is sent, and on his initial deal, he took only 80% of his first year salary slot, which gave the Knicks a whole lot of financial flexibility last year. The Knicks do not have that in year two, right? He goes up to a standard first round contract. If you trade Dadier, the Knicks have $700,000, or the Knicks are $700,000 below the second apron. That allows them, according to Yossi, to bring in a 15th player as early as February 19th, 2026. If it's Tyler Kolek, the Knicks, I think it's only $48,000, if I'm remembering correctly, below the second apron. And the Knicks essentially have no flexibility to bring in someone. I don't think they could bring in a 15th guy before April 2nd. And if you remember last year, the Knicks used that flexibility to bring in PJ Tucker, which made a real difference in their locker room and was a real asset. Ultimately, even though the Knicks could use the flexibility, there might be a time because of injuries the Knicks need the flexibility to bring in someone else. I am personally opposed to the idea. And again, we'll likely do a full episode on this later this week, and I'll explain it more in depth. I would hate if they traded Malcolm Brogdon for Tyler Kolek. And again, if you guys have listened over the last year, you know I am a big fan of Tyler Kolek. I've called him multiple times now. I think someone who's probably already one of the 10 to 15 best passers in the NBA. I think he's one of the most talented passers to ever put on a Knicks uniform. He looked a lot better playing with NBA level talent than he does in summer league, because his whole game is just creating easy shots for guys. And it helps when you are playing with elite shot makers who could take advantage of that creation versus the Knicks summer league roster, who at times just wasted brilliance from Tyler Kolek passing the basketball. But the Overton window, if I'm using that term correctly, for Tyler Kolek to have success was always going to be very, very thin. Because of his age, there was not a lot of upside there. Because of his physical limitations, there was not really a world where he was ever going to be able to play next to Jalen Brunson, right? The guy was always going to be a massive defensive liability and a small one, right? Like you could survive with Malcolm Brogdon's version of a defensive liability at 6'4". It's a little bit harder to survive with Tyler Kolek's version of a defensive liability, where both him and Jalen Brunson are likely real measurement 6'2" or less. And Tyler Kolek does not have the girth that Jalen Brunson brings to the table, right? Like he is barbecue chicken defensively in the NBA. And you compound that with the fact that, like, what did he was shooting, like 16% from three last year and just over 20% from the floor last year. Again, super small sample size. Maybe that gets better. We don't really have evidence of him being a strong on the ball scorer yet. And he has to be such an exceptionally good offensive player to justify a role on the roster where, again, like it's not even campaign level. We watched campaign close a playoff game with Jalen Brunson. The Knicks won the game. Like if you can never play him against the guy, or you can never play him with the guy who's probably going to play 40 plus minutes a game in the postseason, there's just always going to be really limited value there. And at 24 years old, turning 25 in March this season, there's just not like a great ceiling there for Tyler Kolek versus Malcolm Brogdon, who's still just he's 19 years old. Showed real flashes, again, limited flashes, because I think he only played 2 summer league games, but in terms of his ability to attack the basket, to leverage his length, defensively, he looked really good on the ball in limited NBA minutes last year. The shot was inconsistent in the G League. It was inconsistent this summer league, but it looks beautiful. And the Knicks, at least under Tom Thibodeau, were one of the better player development staffs in the NBA. And I think even more important than any of that, the Knicks just don't have anything else in the Malcolm Brogdon archetype in terms of young players, right? Obviously, they have Mikal Bridges, they have OG Anunoby, but behind that, there is not really another like big wing on this roster that profiles as legitimate 3-and-D threat. And to me, like with the Knicks having such limited financial flexibility the next couple of years, it is hard to stomach the idea of moving on from Malcolm Brogdon this early, even if it gives them greater financial flexibility this season. And again, if you are all in on this year, maybe that financial flexibility ups your ceiling a little bit versus what Malcolm Brogdon can do on the court for you this season, where he's likely not quite ready to be an NBA level rotation guy on a good team. I hear all that. I see all that. I just see zero role for Tyler Kolek on this team. Once you brought in Malcolm Brogdon, once you brought in Jordan Clarkson, you still have Deuce McBride, you have Jalen Brunson. I mean, how many injuries would it take for Tyler Kolek to get on the floor and have a substantial role? It just doesn't seem like something's going to happen. Even though the reporting, again, is suggesting that he will be the one who will be traded, both by Ian initially mentioning Deuce and Malcolm, and also Jake Fisher, in that article from Yossi. I'm not subscribed to his Substack, but Jake Fisher apparently said Malcolm is the more likely one to get dealt. So I'm hoping that is ultimately wrong. We will see when we come back. We're going to talk rotation going forward. And again, we'll get into that more depth throughout the rest of the week here on Locked On Knicks. But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here. In fact, if you're watching right now, the games are about to start. And FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So here's why I love it. I am a New York Giants fan. I'm sure a lot of you listening are New York Giants fans, and I'm a long-suffering New York Giants fan. And if you've been watching the team the last 13 years, they have not had an offensive line. They have not had a quarterback. And that makes it just a little tough for me to get invested because I feel like I'm inevitably going to get my heart kicked into my stomach. But with FanDuel, it gives you a way to have a little bit of extra skin in the game if your team is not all that good. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And remember, with FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. That's $300 by visiting FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, what's up, guys? We're back to finish up this edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast. The Knicks have a lot going on right now. Garrison Matthews, we mentioned, is on his way in. Thomas Bryant is a name that Ian Begley and others have thrown that the Knicks have some interest in. Trey Jamison is a name the Knicks have thrown out and had some interest in. Again, they can bring up to, I believe it's 21 players, according to Jeremy Cohen, into training camp. So we'll see. Those guys will likely just be bodies. Because right now, the Knicks last year, who were most comfortable playing 7 or 8 guys, they're on track to have a 10-man rotation. And the reason, after they brought in Landry Shamet, I said, look, they probably didn't want to sign Malcolm Brogdon, or Malcolm Brogdon ultimately didn't want to come to the Knicks because there wasn't really an obvious role for him. And that is still true at the end of the day. And you're going to have to really stretch minutes to make this work. So here is my version of what I think the rotation will look like going forward. And this is just the first crack at it. I'm hoping I get some more time on this show this week or in a future week, especially once the roster is fully set, to go in depth on what I think the final product is going to look like, because, man, it gets really, really tricky when you're putting this together and you're figuring out, okay, is this guy going to play? Is that guy really going to be okay only playing this many minutes? I don't know about that. That seems unlikely. But let's discuss our first draft here. So I think the Knicks are going to do something very in direct opposition to what Tom Thibodeau had them doing and play their guys, their stars, the least minutes of any in the NBA. So my first draft at this, I have Jalen Brunson playing 36 minutes at the starting point guard spot. Or sorry, that was my previous version. I do not have Jalen Brunson playing 36 minutes anymore. I had Jalen Brunson playing 36 minutes before they brought in Malcolm Brogdon. I think you're going to get Jalen Brunson all the way down to 34 minutes. I have Jordan Clarkson playing 14 minutes at the 1, 2 minutes at the 2, 18 minutes a game in total for Jordan Clarkson. I have Deuce McBride, and this hurts my heart because you guys know if I had my way, Deuce would be out there for 35 minutes a game. I have Deuce McBride all the way down to 22 minutes. I have Malcolm Brogdon playing 16 minutes. I had Josh Hart between the 2 and the 3 playing 24 minutes. I have Mikal Bridges playing a clean 30. I have OG playing a clean 30. I have Cat playing just 30 minutes a game. Gershon Yabusele, 18. Mitchell Robinson, 18. And to be fair, this is if everyone is healthy. So in terms of average minutes per game, if you did that over a full season, all those numbers would be higher because guys inevitably miss games. And in those when those guys miss games, other players get to play more time. But fully healthy, if Mike Brown intends to play a 10-man rotation, that looks really interesting to me. Now, does that mean the Knicks will have better health in the playoffs? I guess that's questionable, right? Because we saw the Cavs play that rotation all last year and then get hurt in the playoffs, despite the fact that they should have been fresher than any team in the NBA. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. And sometimes you have bad luck. But I am a believer in load management to the extent that you are positioning yourself in the best possible way by limiting minutes during the regular season of your stars. And if nothing else, you're keeping your guys fresher. And you're hoping you're having a scenario where Jalen Brunson is not turning his ankle seemingly every 2 quarters, where Karl Anthony Towns is not like grimacing and limping around the court throughout the playoffs, where OG Anunoby is not limping and grimacing around for stretches throughout the playoffs, where Josh Hart does not have runner's knee from 2 or 3 straight seasons of blatant overuse from Tom Thibodeau. I think you are going to get the best version of Josh Hart. I think you are going to get the most mentally engaged version of Karl Anthony Towns defensively, a guy who just had a myriad of issues defensively because I think of mental fatigue at times. And hopefully this helps him out a little bit. You're still getting Mitchell Robinson for 18 minutes in a role where you can hopefully get him healthy into April. Maybe you just don't play Mitchell Robinson like the last 2 months of the season. Maybe you only ramp him up to the final 6 games and you keep him in bubble wrap, because we saw what an incredible game changer that guy is if you can actually get him to the playoffs healthy. Maybe you limit Jalen Brunson and give him nights off near the end of the season, right? I think the Knicks have finally built a roster where they can give their guys a break and give their guys a chance, and they can earn the 2 seed with some wiggle room and with some breathing room where they don't have to be pushed to the limit to the end of the year. And yes, there is some merit to what Tom Thibodeau did. There is some merit to the intensity cultivated by treating every single game like a playoff game, but there are also very real drawbacks. And I trust Mike Brown to find the middle ground there, because this roster actually has the depth to justify it. And to defend Tom Thibodeau, he didn't really have a roster last year where he could justify it, right? The trade-off for the Knicks, to some extent, right? Because we saw in the playoffs, they could be very, very good with Landry Shamet on the floor. So I think Tibbs went too far with it. But the trade-off last year to some extent was, if you play your deep depth, you're going to lose more games, right? If you had Precious Achiuwa out there, if they had been throwing Tyler Kolek out there before he was ready, the Knicks were going to lose more games. And you know what? That would have cost them home court in the Eastern Conference Finals. That ultimately didn't save the Knicks, but it was cool to have that. And it would have been cool to have Game 7 at home if the Knicks could have forced it against the Indiana Pacers. So in Tom Thibodeau's defense, they didn't have the roster for it last year. Mike Brown is going to have the roster for it this year. You can limit minutes. You can keep guys fresh, especially if they pull off this trade and Malcolm Brogdon is on this team and Landry Shamet's on this team. They are, in a really realized way, insulated against injury. And I've said it before, but they had incredible luck with injury last year, right? OG Anunoby playing the most games he's played since he was a rookie, just by playing the most minutes per game of his career. Karl-Anthony Towns playing the most games he's played in the last 5 years. The Knicks might not get as lucky this year. The good news is they're prepared if they're not. I think Malcolm Brogdon's a key piece. I am incredibly excited to spend more time with you guys talking about him throughout the rest of this week into next week. And we're hopefully going to have a whole bunch of good guests to break that all down. But until next time, I'm Gavin Schall. This has been Locked On Knicks. We'll talk to you really soon. Peace out.